With seeing how well acquainted the former president and Joe Biden are really with the Grim Reaper at this point, you might really think that the VP is of utter importance. And I'm here to say that it totally is. When you're one heartbeat away, turns out that a person like Joe Biden and who he picked as VP is playing an instrumental role in how history is going to play out. Same thing with Donald Trump. Obviously, he was a millimeter away from something horrible happening. And so, who is your backup and your heir? Politically is super important. Kamala may be younger, she may only be 60, but let's look at who she could pick as vice president right now. First thing, we're going to look at what the polls are like. The reason why I say this is because Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance, who is either MAGA or seen as even further more right-wing and conservative than Donald Trump himself. I point this out to you guys today because he picked his VP as if he was already going to win, which could totally be true. It could totally be the case that J.D. Vance is going to be the heir in 2028, and it matters more to do that than to pick somebody like Glenn Youngkin, who was electable in Virginia of all places. And so we also have somebody in Kamala Harris / Biden who know they're on the downward slope when it comes to a myriad of different issues. And so you're wanting somebody who can compensate for those faults. And so when you're playing from behind, it's a different mathematic equation than is if you're already leading like Donald Trump is. So let's look at the math. So as you can see here, Kamala is already unlikable by about 11 percentage points. You look at Donald Trump, and he's also winning the popular vote against Kamala by 2. Which is the highest he's ever been generally. And you might say, well, it's closer than it was under Biden. But I mean, any person would do better than Joe in polling. And so that's completely expected. Now, keep in mind why the pick of the Democrat politician is important. As you guys can see here, the generic ballot, which is just like basically who's going to win the House of Representatives and whatnot across the nation, is about tied. And so when it's about tied, what that really means for y'all is that if the Democrats had better politicians, they'd actually pull a lot more even with Republicans, okay? So keep this in your head, because when we refer to other polls, you'll notice that, again, Harris is behind in most of these, okay? So she's going to need somebody who will help her out proactively, not insofar as like a guy who will add to the progressive nature of how she's been politically, a far left Californian, but instead somebody who is more perceived as moderate. In fact, when you look at the VP poll, the short list of several people, almost 10 folks, you'll notice that it's very white, it's upper middle aged, but it's basically, like I said, it's white. And so again, contrasted with Kamala, maybe that's what they're going for. And let's read into this. We're going to start today with Senator Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly is a notable person because he's won 2 elections basically back to back in purple Arizona. And that is basically the small ticket item right there. That is going to be what is kind of the most needle prick sort of analysis with this guy. Mark Kelly has pros to him, and we're going to address him right now, according to, again, the Intelligencer website. So New York Magazine writes, Mark Kelly is a Navy veteran, a former astronaut from the swing state of Arizona. Contrast that with J.D. Vance, who's a Marine veteran and former venture capitalist. So again, contrast. We're checking not only does Kelly help at the national level, but how does he go against J.D. Vance in a theoretical debate too? That's also important. But reading off some more potential perks. He has a higher profile than other VP candidates because he has been a gun control husband. And what I mean is that obviously his wife, Gabby Giffords, got shot in a Safeway about 13 years ago, and which is not too far from me, obviously. And what's interesting about this is that Kelly won 58% of Latino voters in a general scope, and that's a key demographic. In a lot of surveys, you'll notice that actually Kamala is slipping with Latinos over previous Democratic candidates. Latinos, if you want to win as a Democrat, you got to win them outright, obviously. But beyond that, you want to win it by a margin that is somewhere around 20 percentage points. It seems like Donald Trump is poised right now to get the most amount of Hispanic support since Bush did in his re-election campaign 20 years ago. Keep this in mind. And so Kelly doing well with Mexicans, namely obviously in Arizona, is super important. Here's some cons though. First and foremost, nobody else would say this, but Mark Kelly, I think, is about 5'6" or something. So that might be a subtle issue that people won't say on media like CNN, but I would point that out as something like, okay, JD Vance is like 6'2". This might be a little bit of an issue in the debate if they're standing. And that being said, absent the just kind of blunt way of just analyzing things for me, you can really see that it could be a bigger issue, though, politically, if you have a person like Katie Hobbs appointing a Democratic senator, which is kosher with those people. But when it comes down to national politics, it goes into an election cycle a couple of years earlier than normal because they would have to run, that replacement would, in 2026. Well, what's important about this, guys? Well, obviously, if Kamala wins and you leave the Senate position open to a replacement by Hobbs, then all of a sudden a Republican in a probably good midterm year for the GOP in 26, they'll flip the seat that otherwise would have stayed Democrat those other 2 years. And so that's a horrible prospect for the Democrats. So it's really a notable trade-off when you look at it that way. So when it comes to Mark Kelly, I think he's a B+ sort of pick for Kamala Harris. There is the nitpick, which again, I'm kind of a D-bag for mentioning, but he is pretty short and that just subconsciously hurts you. That being said, though, he does have a good wife, as in obviously Gabrielle Giffords is a likable person just in the general scope, as she's a victim of a horrible incident. But also Donald Trump has had similar things happen. And so that sort of like cudgel to beat the Republicans over with is not going to really fly. That being said, though, in a debate stance, how is he? I would say without, I obviously saw him debate a couple years ago for Senate. That being said, though, I don't have a strong impression for you guys right now. The reason why I don't want to review the tape as of right now is because he's not the pick, and so that would be a huge time investment. But also keep in mind that JD Vance is a competent debater too. You could watch his debate 2 years ago against Tim Ryan. He did fine. Now, so that sort of dynamic is not very notable. That being said, as a candidate overall, I think him winning Arizona both times is pretty impressive on paper. Caveat, obviously, that he went against Martha McSally, who is in and of herself not a great candidate by any means. And then he went against, I think, Blake Masters. And Blake Masters also was basically left out to dry by the Mitch McConnell RNC, or the Senate funding apparatus. And so that's two caveats right there. But I do think he's a strong candidate. Now, Josh Shapiro is somebody who seems kind of unassailable. He seems like the obvious Costco pick, the biggest bulk one, the most wins. But when you really look into the scenarios where he gives you Pennsylvania, you have to add in several caveats. Now, another thing that you guys need to write down in your head, okay? When it comes down to it, Josh Shapiro is a candidate who did pretty well in Pennsylvania, who I mean, I would personally say that Pennsylvania is the most important state in this election, obviously. That being said, he does well there, more than even Joe Biden did in 2020, which is remarkable because, again, Joe Biden was supposed to be Scranton Joe. He's supposed to be the old white guy that appeals to the blue-collar worker. And it turns out that Shapiro took that a step further and won even more votes than him. In fact, in 2022, he beat Doug Mastriano by about 15 percentage points for governorship of Pennsylvania. Now, there's caveats to it, like I said. Obviously, Mastriano was a pretty unpopular candidate in an election that was more so centered over abortion rights than was all the other issues that were plaguing the country. And so Republicans got outmatched on the basis of that very key issue, because when it came down to it, abortion is a very popular plank for the Democrats to defend on. Because of this fact, he did a lot better than otherwise. If it were a better Republican politician, he probably would have only won by less than 10 percentage points. But to still win Pennsylvania by more than 5, no matter what, is still pretty damn noteworthy. And so I would give him credit there. To add upon that, he's perceived as a moderate too, which again, Kamala is seen to the left of Biden by any standard. And Biden already isn't known for being super centrist anyhow. And so the Democratic Party and that ticket, it's behooved to move to the right, really, when it comes down to public perception. Now, this is an interesting thing because on one hand, you have somebody in Kamala who is somewhere between a Biden and a Bernie Sanders, just vaguely speaking for you guys at home. That being said, obviously Shapiro is more of a temperance to that ticket. And so I think people in middle America might see somebody like Shapiro as more palatable and saying, okay, well, you know, Kamala's kind of like too gross, but if you add this sort of sweetener, all of a sudden it becomes okay. And so this might win over some suburban moms and whatnot. Also keep in mind too, that he is Jewish. Now, this is notable for a couple of reasons. Historically, it's rare, but also to have a VP that's Jewish might bring some strife with the Hamas stance and with the whole war that's going on. It's an awkward thing. Democrats are caught between placating the far left, I guess, the progressive squad members, but also trying to placate demographically Arabs and people in Dearborn, Michigan, namely, which is super vital. But also, obviously, most Democrats are still broadly pro-Israel. And so it's an awkward mix. And to put in Shapiro assuages, I guess, the more like old school Israel believers. But also keep in mind that the Zionist kind of like Josh Shapiro is going to make it awkward for the people on the far left that are obviously more towards Palestinian sympathy. And so that's going to be an issue, perhaps. Now, the last thing for Shapiro in this paragraph that I find noteworthy is that Shapiro stands on the endorsement of Kamala. Look how he words it. It's very deliberate. I've known Kamala Harris for nearly 2 decades. We've both been prosecutors, and we've both stood up for the rule of law. We've both fought for the people and delivered results. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that, again, he's the former Attorney General of Pennsylvania. So the angle is very clear here. Prosecute the 34-count felon Donald Trump. That seems like a more moderate message. Again, tough on crime is the implication if you're a prosecutor. And so that is what I'm taking away from here. Now, apparently there's a clip of Shapiro going anti-Trump as of a couple years ago.
That's not how we do things in this Commonwealth or in this country. And that is not freedom. You know, this guy loves to talk a good game about freedom, right? Let me tell you something. It's not freedom to tell women what they're allowed to do with their bodies. That's not freedom. It's not freedom to tell our children what books they're allowed to read.
Okay, so as you can see, disagree as much as I may. I can be obvious and a straight shooter, like the video, if you like my angle here. But the point being is that this guy comes off more energetic than Joe Biden by a country mile, and he's actually a decent speaker now that I'm paying attention. And mind you, that's all you need. You know, to be a better speaker than Kamala is a limbo bar that is really not even of note, okay? So she's a horrible speaker. That being said, of course, Shapiro, on the other hand, seems to have a complete handle of the situation. In fact, he knows the era that he's in. He knows the pro-choice argument is the popular one and got him the election. And he also spins it against Trump, like, oh, or the Republicans, oh, you care about freedom? Well, what about the freedom to choose? And mind you, that sort of rhetoric is appealing to the suburban middle class. It's appealing to people that are pro-choice, but tepidly. Not by saying that abortion is great, but instead to say that you ought to have the choice to even exercise the right for that. And a Republican obviously can disagree on the merits of that, but the argument is couched in kind of Clintonian sort of triangulation, sort of trying to appeal to a broader base. And that's what somebody like Kamala could really use. So as of Josh Shapiro, I think the governor of Pennsylvania is all, I would say he's probably like an A- sort of candidate. You know, A+ would be like if you, by some miracle of God, got a Barack Obama out of Michigan, you know, like, okay, swing state and also charismatic, also diverse, but also not a DEI hire, debatably with Kamala. That would be the ideal, but Jesus isn't coming back right now, and Obama is not eligible to run for VP. And so the point being is that Josh Shapiro is about as good as it gets. You know, swing state governor, the biggest swing state, the Keystone State governor, popular and perceived as moderate. It's pretty good. Again, with the small caveat of obviously he probably disagrees politically with Kamala somewhat, so that could provide friction, but I doubt it. And also, obviously, the awkwardness of having a Jew who's pro-Israel as somebody like Kamala, who is to the left of Biden on the Israel issue, plus obviously all the other cascading effects of that, could be a problematic issue. But I don't think that would be a deal breaker or anything. Roy Cooper, on the other hand. Now, here's another, 60-year-old white dude or whatever. So again, you're getting the motif. Okay, so the pros for Roy Cooper, who's the governor of North Carolina. He was the attorney general there for 16 years. So you can see this reoccurring theme, prosecute the Republicans. Okay. Roy Cooper was elected in 2016 and reelected in 20. Trump won the states both times in 16 and 20. He outran Joe Biden, which is good because that's what you need. Again, Joe Biden barely beat Donald Trump in 2020. So ideally, you want somebody better than that so they can carry Kamala. Because again, Kamala is down by about 2 percentage points in the popular vote. So you need somebody to lift her up and save her now. And so there you go. Now, let's see this sort of thing right here. At age 67, term-limited Cooper doesn't draw in a strong contrast in terms of younger VP options, which is true. He's basically about as standard as you can get. Like if you had a AI generate a politician, it'd be a guy in his mid-60s, white guy. You can see it. But that doesn't really matter too much in my opinion. That being said, Harris's stance is that the Harris campaign has asked Cooper for vetting materials. So think about that. Interesting. So he could actually be picked. Cooper's stance: on the morning after Biden dropped out, Cooper was asked on Morning Joe if he would want to be Harris's VP. And he said that he appreciates people talking to him, but that he also thinks it's really important that we focus on her this week. The vice presidential conversation needs to happen later, and I want to make sure Kamala wins. Interesting. Keep in mind, this guy definitely wants the job, which is interesting. Again, Roy Cooper is probably a B- pick for a couple different reasons. First of all, he's from North Carolina, which on paper is a swing state, but we all know that the true path to 270, the easiest, lowest path of least resistance, I guess, now that I botched the reference, but the point being is that you want somebody like a Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. North Carolina is just not as appeasing of a state to be from. Now, that being said, Roy Cooper is also older than Josh, and so that's also less appealing. And he's also term limited, so he doesn't really have a future past this point. So if he doesn't get picked, he's going to be a consultant probably. So some sort of congressional swamp creature. But moving on, let's look into a small sample of Roy Cooper speaking so you have an idea.
Welcomes back Vice President Kamala Harris as she and President Biden get ready to defeat Donald Trump in November.
So it seems like a feigned Southern draw or whatever. I mean, he's an all right speaker, again, better than Kamala, so I guess he clears that.
Job. You know, this election is not just about what kind of president we want to have. This election is about what kind of country we want to be.
So he's an all right speaker, again, kind of corny in my opinion, but I'm Republican, so maybe I'm just player hating. He literally looks like George Bush. Just like George Bush, basically. So, I mean, he fits the archetype, much like how Biden did years ago. But yeah, like I said, I would basically rate him a C+ maybe candidate for VP. Truth is again, he's basically having everything that Shapiro has, but just the dollar store edition. I just don't see what he would bring to the market other than what already is provided by Shapiro. Just that he might be a cheaper date, which, you know, those don't turn out great. But Andy Beshear, obviously, is an option that is very popular now. And Andy Beshear is on the younger side, too. So the pros are with him that he's a 2-term governor from Kentucky, which is electorally really impressive. Now, reiterating and caveating that, again, the Republicans he went against, I mean, they weren't sending their best. I mean, it was Matt Bevin and who else? Again, these were off-year elections, and so to win a state as a governor off-year is much less relevant than obviously when you're on the general election ticket, because it's just less polarized at that point. Okay, it's a complicated subject, but I hope you understand what I mean. Now, he's the former state attorney general. Okay, I misread that. I think it was Daniel Cameron, who was a black attorney general in Kentucky, who he beat in 2019. And then he won again later. Okay, so he beat this guy by 5 percentage points, which is, again, pretty good, really good. It's like if a Republican won California, let's say by like 3, you know. Now, Beshear accomplished this for the party, despite still keeping up on important issues like abortion rights. So that's interesting. Again, abortion seems to be the thing that even in red states seems to be pretty popular. Even in Ohio, the referendum on abortion got the liberal option voted in. And so keep that in mind. So abortion seems to be the backbone for these moderate Democrats. Keep this in your head. Now, the people in the New York Magazine have 46 years old as his con. Okay, so he's 46 years old, so he's about 15 years younger than Kamala, and he's also about 40 years younger than Biden. Beshear is one of the youngest governors in the nation. In fact, his dad was governor, by the way. That could be a positive when it comes to candidates' ages, but it could also underscore the lack of experience by the governor, which is interesting. On the national stage, though, while Kentuckians embrace Beshear, it is unlikely he'll deliver the ruby red state for Democrats that Trump won by a ton both times. So it's dubious if Beshear would help in the swing states when he's not even from that place. Now, that being said, obviously, I still think that he would help with the moderate vote. I think that he would ameliorate it. Kind of like Shapiro, kind of like Roy Cooper. I would say Beshear is probably the most conservative option out of the ones we talked about because he's from Kentucky, and so that just seems obvious. He's probably not as liberal on guns as is Kamala, and I don't think he's as liberal as Kamala on literally anything. So that could be awkward. All right, so Beshear seems to be pretty willing to taking up the job of vice president. Let's see what he says
Their own
here.
people, Suri. Are you at least open to the possibility of being a running mate to Vice President Harris?
Well, I think if somebody calls you on that, what you do is at least listen. And I want the American people to know what a Kentuckian is and what they look like, because let me just tell you that J.D. Vance ain't from here. Now, the nerve that he has to call the people of Kentucky, of Eastern Kentucky, lazy. Listen, these are the hardworking coal miners that powered the Industrial Revolution, that created the strongest middle class the world has ever seen, powered us through 2 world wars. We should be thanking them, not calling them lazy. And so today was an opportunity to both support the vice president, but also to stand up for my people. Nobody calls us names, especially those that have worked hard for the betterment of this country.
Interesting. I don't know. So speaking wise, obviously already better than Kamala. That being said, he seems a little, I don't know, a little Lindsey Graham-ish, if you know what I mean. I don't know. He comes off a little soft. Again, his dad was the governor. You could talk about like, oh, Kentuckians work so hard. But I mean, are you a Nepo baby? Let's think about it one way. Now, that being said, J.D. Vance obviously is a guy who says he's from the Rust Belt, and that is true. But this guy Beshear might seem more congenial and also more blue collar somehow on a VP debate stage. So that's an interesting dynamic there. It could be like a neutralizing effect on somebody like JD if you have somebody like Beshear with more bona fides as to working with coal miners and whatever else is pertinent to the Kentucky kind of northern or southern Midwest kind of Rust Belt area, that sort of politic. So anyway, you saw he had that very real deep Southern accent. Well, not deep Southern, but you know what I mean. So he comes off more folksy for sure. Kamala could totally use that. Again, she's from San Francisco, so I mean, it doesn't get any more woke and kind of capital from Hunger Games than that. So that would be a vector that I think Beshear could balance the ticket in. So that'd be great for the Democrats. That being said, as a candidate, I think he's probably like a B+ to an A-. I personally think Shapiro, obviously politically, helps her more just in Pennsylvania, which in and of itself is a way bigger whale than Kentucky. But even absent that, obviously, I think that Shapiro's also. I just think he has more sway. I think he has more clout. I think his voice has more power. I think he's also politically more adept than Beshear, which might seem awkward to many. But you have to understand that even though this guy won Kentucky, he won it in an off year against a crappy candidate both times. In fact, you could argue that. But also beyond this, his dad was the governor, so he kind of got a tutorial on how to do everything already. And so for him to win an impressive race is still cool for him, but just underscore that with the fact that if your dad was governor of the state you're running in, odds are you probably already have an advisor lined up. You know who to hire, you know who to talk to, where to campaign. But okay, we'll give him credit. So like I said, a B+ candidacy still. Let's go to Pete Buttigieg. Okay, so right now the Secretary of Transportation is Pete Buttigieg. So Mayor Pete is from South Bend, Indiana, like you know. He's on the younger side. He's 42. Now, you might think the video's already over 20 minutes long. I like to talk a lot and read. So like the video if you want more content like this. But anyway, let's keep it a little more brief. So you probably already know about Buttigieg if you're as big of a nerd about politics as I am. You already saw him on the primary debate stage. You already saw his backstory somewhat. So he's obviously a gay white guy and he's younger. So that's like just on paper what he is. But beyond that, he has a pretty good record when it comes to kind of stuffing the resume. So he's a veteran. Obviously not shooting at anybody, but I think he drove people around. Okay. Now, that being said, he was in Afghanistan 10 years ago. Beyond this, he's a Rhodes Scholar, which looks good. And again, Navy veteran. Won the 2020 Iowa caucuses, which was, suspect to say the least. I mean, they had the votes counted by, I believe, a company called Shadow Inc. So anyhow, he did pretty well given the lack of stature, both physically but also just politically. He had no acumen. Well, not acumen, but I mean, like, he didn't really have position to leverage. He didn't have a big soapbox back then. So for him to get in the higher single digits as a candidate was pretty impressive. Also, he was in his 30s back then. So he seems to have this upstart personality. And by that, I mean that it seems pretty impressive what he did. He also ran a way better race than did Kamala Harris, who, again, is like 20 years older than him. So that's also notable, too. But he does have cons. Buttigieg struggled to attract black voters in 2020. He oversaw a number of transit crises in his secretaryship, okay? So he has mixed reviews as a cabinet head for a Biden administration, which is not popular, by the way. So like I said, this black voter issue is a niche one at best. This is definitely a con, but just understand that Kamala is perceived as black. And so like, if you're caring at all about the black base, so to speak, you should already have that covered. Now, again, he doesn't help at all. And if you watch Pete talk, they call him Mayo Pete for a reason. These black people do. And I agree, because Mayo Pete, he comes off super, like, if you're not white, you're not vibing. In fact, if you're not like a posh white person, you're not vibing in the way he talks. It's like, he's either fake and trying to be folksy, or he's just talking like a nerd. And so you can see why black people don't like him. Now, Buttigieg is obviously going to take the job if it's given to him, because he will be out of one soon if Trump wins. So, sorry. So let's just watch a little clip so you have an idea of how he talks. Just give it 10 seconds.
It's different parts of the Midwest.
Right.
I know a lot of guys like J.D. Vance. I've run into a lot of guys like him. Not so much when I was growing up in Indiana.
Thiel. Peter Thiel is his big backer.
Yeah, for sure. And
okay, if people don't know who that is, he started PayPal.
Okay, wait, hold on.
these Silicon Valley folks veering into Trump world with J.D. Vance and backing Trump. What are they thinking? Silicon Valley is supposed to be, they're supposed to care about climate. They're supposed to be, pro-science and rational and libertarian, so normally libertarian.
Okay, so here's the thing with Mayor Pete. Buttigieg is a very good speaker. What I mean is that he's very technically competent. If you had to write an essay by the book, you would hire him. The problem is that when it comes to charisma and presidential and vice presidential debates, you need some sort of like tact and wit. And he doesn't seem to have not so much wit, but charisma. And people like Biden had that in spades in 2012 against Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan was a younger dude, like I think in his early 40s, who at the time was proficient on the issues, but did not have charisma. Biden, on the other hand, had less control over the issues, but kind of had a better idea of crowd control and coming off congenial and having charisma. Okay. And so he was perceived as walloping Ryan in that debate, despite, again, Ryan being okay at arguing and not stuttering and all that. So Pete does have the essentials of being articulate, but what he does not have is any sort of acumen past that. So it's like if you were to eat a cheeseburger, but without any sauce, any vegetables, no seasoning. I mean, you're going to not die, but you're going to be somewhat underwhelmed. And I think a lot of black folk pick up on that exactly. I mean, can you envision this guy in a black barbershop and lasting more than 20 seconds without kind of complaining on Yelp or something? You would be surprised. And so, to be honest, he is adding better charisma than Kamala, obviously, but it's coming down to who are we going to win over in the middle? Undecideds, basically. Okay, well, he's not really helping with that. You might say, okay, well, he's a guy, he's white, but it doesn't really balance out Kamala's diversity because, again, he is gay and he comes off a certain way that is not palatable to a lot of people. And so he seems like a pretty substandard person politically. Beyond that, as a pick, obviously, I'd say he's like a D+, D-, and he might like that rating a little too much, in fact. But that being said, there's nothing wrong with Pete at a visceral level. It's more so politically, he's not great. And also just keep in mind that when it comes down to Pete Buttigieg, he's also from South Bend, Indiana, which literally has no worth politically when it comes to the Electoral College in this election. And so keep this in mind. So for all those reasons and more, he's not a good candidate for VP. That being said, Gretchen Whitmer's the next one. Gretchen is 52, so that's a great age. But also, she won re-election against Tudor Dixon, who was a smoke show, by the way, by about 10 percentage points. Pretty impressive. Now, the only problem with Whitmer, to be honest, is that she is a girl on girl ticket. And that is maybe not a tough sell, but certainly something that people might be subconsciously kind of against, kind of like Pete Buttigieg, where there's a lot of people that are live and let live, but they'd be like, okay, like, dude, like, seriously, like, I know Kamala got on her knees, but like this guy too, like, he's a man, but maybe they won't spell it out. But this could be a troubling issue going forward. We don't know, and I'm somewhat agnostic on that issue. That being said, of course, she is right now the co-chair of the Biden campaign and will stay on for the Harris ticket, obviously. Interesting. That being said, she's being vetted, so that's notable. Again, she's from Michigan, which is the second most important state electorally, arguably, behind Pennsylvania. And so that's huge. Also, she, like Shapiro, won by a lot. Again, not the best candidates. And in fact, when you look at how she won, it was basically because of abortion, bottom line. But still, she's politically very competent, I would say. She's also a way better speaker than Kamala, and so she would have a balancing effect over somebody like Kamala, because again, Kamala, San Francisco, senator. Again, you have governor of Michigan, way more reasonable in my opinion. Let's let her talk for 10 seconds so you have an idea of what
Convicted
this is.
felon, stokes violence, overturned Roe, and drove our economy into the ground the last time he was in the White House. Vice President Harris has my full support, and I'm proud to be co-chair of her campaign.
So notice, she has noticeably an accent, which is good for voters, just reflexively. Also, more charisma than Harris. Again, not amazing amounts, not even above average, but okay. Not as annoying as Harris, in my opinion. That being said, I think that Gretchen is in a debate with Vance, not favored in my humble opinion. That being said, I have no idea because, again, it's like it's a very unknown quantity what we're working with here in that projection. But I think that she would be a B plus or maybe A minus sort of pick because she has some caveats to her. Like, again, she is a woman, so that might be a double dip. That's too far for some people subconsciously. But also, she's not as conservative as some other candidates, and maybe Kamala is looking for that more so politically, and so it's somewhat complicated. That being said, again, governor from Michigan, and also popular. Keep this in mind. So I'd give Gretchen Whitmer a B plus for a candidate. Now Tim Walz is kind of like a far off candidate. I'm basically just going to skip over Tim because I'm 95% sure he won't be picked. In fact, I'll increase that to 97%. There's no chance, basically. And also, he doesn't really have anything going for him. I mean, you're a bald 60-year-old white dude, which is worse than Roy Cooper, who's even older because he at least looks more viscerally alive. But so Tim Walz is 60, so that's not good. He's from Minnesota, which the Democrats they're assuming they're going to win the state because if they're not, then they're screwed either way. So him being from Minnesota isn't that big of a deal towards a positive. So he doesn't really have any sort of like, he has no leverage here. I don't think he'll be picked, and I don't think he'd be great either. I think he'd be a C plus pick, basically. JB Pritzker, on the other hand, is somebody that people say is going to be very famous in the future. Now, assuming he probably gets on Ozempic, gets his stomach stapled, maybe he'll live that long. But, forecasting into the future, apparently people are very bullish on his electoral prowess. So JB Pritzker is a popular second-term governor of Illinois, obviously. He defends abortion a lot, which is politically solvent. But he's also known for being a big billionaire, basically. If you look here, he has self-financed his campaigns, and his family has a big part in the Hyatt hotels. Okay, so think about it. The Hyatt Hotel, so that's a net worth of $3.5 billion. So he's about as rich as Trump was in 2016. So just imagine the millions of dollars he could add to the ticket if he was on it. Interesting. So this is a very interesting dynamic. He's from Illinois, so politically irrelevant for this election. And beyond that, he is also he's kind of indirect as to whether or not he would join the ticket. And you can kind of tell by the way they word the endorsement if they would be willing to join. So it's a difficult ask. And also, he is the richest politician, basically, aside from maybe Trump. And so that would kind of take away a talking point from Trump being like this spoiled billionaire, too. That being said, let's see what he says here.
Donald Trump is a convicted felon, an adjudicated rapist, and a congenital liar. He's a racist, sexist, misogynistic narcissist who wants to use the levers of power to enrich himself and punish anyone who dares speak a word against him.
So, okay, you got the point. That's a very hateable person, in my opinion. Now, to Democrats, they might love it, but I mean, this is basically titular of like a 2017 Twitter feminist, okay? Donald Trump is expletive, okay? So this is not winning over people in the middle, and that's what you need. So just off of this clip alone, he's definitely not a good pick. I would say he's a C minus because, again, he has that one caveat of, again, he is better at speaking than Kamala, arguably, and beyond that, obviously, he has a ton of money to give too. So maybe that could be the upside, but everything else is really bad. And again, it might be unprofessional, but I mean, just look at the guy, really. I mean, we have JD Vance compared to this guy, and JD starts looking like a male model, which is very sus of me to say, but it's true. I mean, this is not great. I mean, I didn't know Chris Christie was an actual Democrat. I just thought he hated Trump, but apparently he's reincarnated and out there. Now, Wes Moore, people are saying that he's really good. Again, I know nothing of him for obvious reasons. I mean, he's the Maryland governor, but he's 45 years old, and he's the third black person to ever be elected governor, apparently, in the U.S. So that's kind of notable. So you can kind of see where the angle would be here. He's a Army combat veteran, which is pretty cool. He's a Rhodes Scholar, which is extremely impressive. Again, Bill Clinton was one, so just keep that in mind. And the former CEO of Robin Hood Foundation, an anti-poverty nonprofit. So that's pretty good for optics. Cons, though, is that while Moore drew some national attention for the handling of the bridge collapse in Baltimore, he has far less experience as a politician than the other people on the list, which is true. And he obviously endorsed Harris. So let's hear him speak a little bit.
You believe that in this moment our state could be bolder. You believe that in this moment our state could go faster. You believe that in this moment our state would not wait its turn. And you believed in the son of an immigrant, a graduate of a 2-year college.
Okay, so you get it. Okay, you get the point. He's basically like a Dalisto Martin Luther King. Like when you really compare it, it makes sense. So you can see what the appeal would be with this guy. It's kind of younger, blacker, it's double dipping on Kamala, basically. Like more diversity. I love the poor people. You get the angle. And again, I'm not hating on him personally. He seems to have a great record insofar as like nonpartisan, military combat experience, Rhodes Scholar. God knows I'm not one. And so, I'll give him credit. He seems like a nice enough guy. But when it comes down to it, are you appealing to the white people that Trump is winning with in suburban Pennsylvania? Are you winning with the white folk that went from Obama 2012 to Trump 2016? That's what matters, actually, in politics. Moore is young, and that's not great. Again, the youth argument against Biden and Trump is that you guys are 80, not you guys are 60 or 65. The issue is, can you serve 8 years? Moore is a little young, honestly. If he's only 45, that's on the young side. I mean, what tells an American that he'd be any better as a VP now than in 10 years? Think about it. Like, ideally, an American would want somebody pushing 60, actually, because they could serve the full 8 years, but also be experienced. And right now, he's kind of on the low side. So I view him as like a C- pick because, again, it reinforces what the Democrats like, which is diversity, a good record. You can understand all these things as fine. But the issue is appealing to the center, and that's what they need to win the election. Again, they are down 2, okay? Down 2 for a Democrat means they're losing for sure. Keep this in mind. Gavin Newsom, on the other hand. Gavin Newsom is interesting. Gavin Newsom, I've covered him specifically on my channel. I recommend you watch it. It's one of my best videos, actually, just to fillet myself. But a month ago, I covered how Gavin Newsom spun the Biden debacle with the debate in such a way that was so impressive. I have a tagline for Gavin Newsom. If I had to pick a Democrat politician to talk his way out of a DUI, it would be him, okay? Not because he's not guilty, but just because he'd talk his way out of it through charisma and confidence and being a con artist. He basically has the triple C's of a great politician and a used car salesman at the highest level. Now he's trying to replace gas-operated vehicles in California, so you can see how the whole motif kind of gets painted with time. But anyway, Gavin Newsom right now is currently obviously vying for national office, as a lot of people are. And so he might take the job, he might not. He might sit this out for 2028, but let's just kind of run through this thing real quick because he's very fascinating. The thing with Newsom is that he's double dipping with Harris on every issue aside from appearance. Again, Newsom is like a handsome 6'3", 50-something-year-old white guy who talks really well. So appearance-wise, he's the exact opposite of Kamala. But with Newsom, it's different because he is just basically the same when it comes to progressive politics. He's not a socialist, no, but he's like a Clintonian on steroids. He's basically Obama plus 8 years of further progression when it comes to healthcare, to illegal aliens and stuff like this. He's horrible on these issues, and California is seen as a pariah nationally, okay? So if you run on the platform of Kamala from San Francisco, Gavin from San Francisco, it comes into a head in a way that is so awkward. It's gross, really, when you think about it, folks. It's not appealing to the middle is what my point is. Against J.D. Vance, I think Newsom could actually win. Gavin is an incredible debater, to be clear. He's amazing as a politician, objectively. But as I respect the hustle, I can also acknowledge that his politics are freaking atrocious, and they're also unpopular. And so I don't think Kamala would pick him out of selfish reasons. They're friends. Apparently, they've gone on vacation together, which is kind of like what are the implications there? But that being said, they're close. So it's not even personal. It's just to say, like, Gavin, you are too far left and you're too much of a pariah over your own record or based off the record, to really be an electable person for VP. And so I don't think he'll get picked. I think he'd be a C- pick because, again, he's awful. Just that obviously he's a good talker. That's about it. So as I wrap up the video, let me sum up everything I just did in the last minute, okay? So basically, the best candidate Kamala could pick as of right now, just looking at it on surface value, I would say that she ought to pick Josh Shapiro. Then I would want her to pick Andy Beshear. Then I would want her to pick Gretchen Whitmer. I would like her to pick then maybe Mark Kelly, then Roy Cooper. You get the idea, okay? It could, so this is not a prediction as to who she will pick. It's just going through all the possibilities, okay? Anybody with a non-0% chance of being picked, I covered it pretty extensively, I'd say. Maybe a little overkill, but you know, what's dead meat to anybody anyway? Okay, that didn't land. Whoops. It's roadkill, not dead meat. Okay, anyhow, the point being is that Kamala is in a position where she needs somebody more moderate, basically the opposite of her within the confines of the Democratic Party. And that option list is pretty short. Okay, it's less than 10 people. And as of right now, there's like 3 to 5 good people she could pick. And then everybody else is kind of trash, like a Newsom or Buttigieg. And she could very well end up with a Buttigieg, but we'll see kind of shortly. So anyway, I leave you with that. Comment down below what your opinions are on this. And also like the video if you liked it. It means the world to me. So see ya on the next one. Adios.